Hey everybody, thanks for coming back for more making of buildings, which I know I've been doing that in pretty much the entire first episode, but there are still 2 more buildings that I need to finish before this entire entrance building is actually done. And before, in the second half in this video, we can start on the pathwork of the entrance plaza, which is really cool. We're gonna do some fun stuff with that. But first, I need to finish this. But I do think that this building that I'm working on in particular right now is really interesting, and probably even my favorite of the entire main street. Of course not counting the big entrance gates, just because it's actually based on a reference. And most of these buildings were pretty much just winging it. I just started building buildings without any kind of reference material, and started a new time-lapse on every building, and if it went good, just keep on recording that time-lapse and keep working on the building until it looked good. And that was pretty much the approach to most of these things. But this one is actually made with a reference, and it's very far from a recreation, but it is very heavily inspired by a castle in real life. It's my favorite castle in the world, actually. It's the Plaza castle in Romania, in Sinaia, if I recall correctly, which is a really beautiful castle, and it's got this really interesting blend of like the lower parts of the castle, which are all stone with very beige looking colors on the accents, and the top part of the building, which has that timber framework with I think a lot of red wood and very fancy roofs as well. And it's a really beautiful castle, and I just wanted to get a bit of inspiration from it and get that as a small hint into the tower on the side here, because I did want to keep those 2 castle towers on the ends of both wings, sort of like the big arms that kind of greet you as you go into the park. I'm not sure if that really makes any sense, but that's just the idea of how I set up these buildings. And at the end of like both of those large wings, I wanted to have a tower to, well, just make everything look pretty cool. That was the basic idea. And I think this is a kind of style which fits into the rest of the buildings quite nicely, because obviously I did want to have a different style and color palettes to each of these buildings, while at the same time making sure that it fits in with the rest of the buildings as well. And this is just a style which I think fits in quite nicely, but also one sort of idea about this entire entrance, which I haven't really mentioned before, is that it's also sort of a test of styles. It's not just a test of the building pieces in the game, because it's obviously a very good opportunity to get used to what the pieces are and what you can do with them and everything, but it's also a bit of a test of what styles I can get back later in the park. Like say this particular color palette of this one building works out very well, or the way that the tower is set up with the roofs of one building, it works so well that I figure you might as well use it in the rest of the park. So many of these buildings are kind of like little prototypes of styles that I might try later on in the park, and I think for this building in particular, I want to try something similar to it in the rest of the park as well, where it'll be a building that stands on its own as a restaurant or as a station for a ride, something like that. Just because I think it's a style that I really love about it, just with those like 2 halves of having the bottom half be that very light stone beige-ish color accented part, and having the top part be the more alpine looking timber framework. And the basic shape of this building is very simple in this case, having the tower at the very end of it, and having some of the roofs that come out on the sides, and some different heights and different arches and everything to make it look a little bit more dynamic and interesting than just a single flat wall. And that is very basically the approach of these buildings here. I actually think one of the things that I would mention as a small tip, at least I really like it, is instead of using the planks to get the wooden planks in on buildings, use those square pillars. I think they have a little bit of a like better texture, they blend into each other a bit more, but also they're a bit thicker, so you can like get them out of the wall as much as you can, and just by having them stick out of the building, they just pop out a little more, or a little bit more, there we go, which, you know, it doesn't make too much of a difference, but it does make a little bit of a difference. It does make it look a bit nicer, I think. And also what it helps with is that sometimes you want to cover a window, like you want to cover the borders of a window because you don't really like them, and you want to use the wooden color instead. And if you use those pillars, you can bring them out as much as you need to cover up stuff. I just really love the sort of thick look that it has to it. And as for the strategy of making the timber On this, it's just really simple. Some beams around the windows to just make sure that that's all good, and filling up the other empty spaces with horizontal beams, and that is just about it. There's not too much diagonal beam action going on, just a little bit on the tower because I had quite a large surface area to cover with wood over there, and a few diagonal supports on the wooden supports that need to support the roof, just to give that, you know, extra support. But that's really just about everything. And aside from that, I just wanted to add a little bit more detail to the building by adding those baskets and adding some window boxes. I think they're actually planters. Or, yeah, these are actually the planters. I actually just like using the planters a bit more than using the actual window boxes because they're just slightly larger, which I guess works a little bit better. But yeah, that's it for that building. We're already moving on to the next building, which is a bit of a filler. I have to be very honest, these middle buildings are just not as interesting as the ones on the side. And this one in particular is just a simple, sort of straightforward building with a tower on it. Just to give it a bit more flair than the simple, straightforward building that it is. But it's just, it's not really anything too special. I do think it's... yeah, I think it's the only building with a dark wall. Most of these buildings have a very light brick wall. Actually, all of them have a brick wall and stucco parts for the higher sections of the building. But this is the only building with, like, a wall that's very dark and accents that are lighter than it. I think usually I want to change, like, the colors of pieces so that you have either dark walls with light accents or light walls with dark accents. And most of these buildings have just very light walls with like very dark cornerstones or pillars or windows over them. But in this case, I figured might as well reverse those roles. So this is going to be a very dark brick building, kind of a Dutch looking texture on the bricks as well, with some very light details on top of it. And that tower, which is like the only thing that really sticks out from it and gives it a little bit of extra height as well. I guess it just makes sure that the building isn't a complete wallflower. Anyway, I wanted to skip forward in the time-lapse there a little bit because this is not the most interesting building. And you might notice that I'm adding like an extra bit of foliage around it just because it's not that interesting, and just by adding that extra bit of detail, it at least comes out a bit more. Like any boring building that's just really straightforward and just has walls, but that I still want to have a lot of detail on, I pretty much fill with baskets and flower boxes, which is super lazy, I know, but it mostly works, and especially because I wanted to get as like a charming atmosphere into it, it really helps to get as much foliage on the buildings as you can. But the next thing that I wanted to do, and this is something which I was failing with for quite a while here, is make the planters for the trees. I have been planning to have trees around this plaza for quite a while. I do want to place them very selectively though. It's something which you don't really see on camera, but it's something which I was playing with for a very long time, just because I wanted to have trees to just make the plaza look a bit more alive, add some greenery to it. But on the other hand, I also wanted to make sure that they don't block out any like sites that I really wanted to preserve, so they're gonna be quite sparse. There's not going to be too many of them, and especially here I wanted to keep them very much on the side, so they just kind of come out from over the buildings, but they don't really cover up any views from any place. Like, you should still be able to see all of the different facades as you approach the park. And a bit of detailing over here as well, because some of these buildings didn't have much detailing. And now we're pretty much into the big parts of what is going to be the plaza, and a bit of my like pathwork experiments, if you will, in this case. You might know that I've been ranting about the way that paths work in the game. I think the path system isn't that bad. The only problem with it is that many theme parks have these very large open plazas that really flow through an area and have a lot of like different colors and shapes and illustrations on the pathwork as well. And that's just something that you can barely get into Planet Coasters, and that's what I wanted to really try in this plaza. And if it works, I might as well use it in the rest of the park as well. Consider this a bit of a prototype as well. So the plan here is to basically get a very wide, large concrete field in the middle of all of these paths to kind of make it look as if this is one very large plaza instead of a big grassy area. And that's basically the first part of the plan, which took a lot of placing all of these different buildings very precisely to get in the curves around the plaza. But that's not going to be everything. That would be quite boring. So obviously I'll also add some flower boxes and planters, a lot of path elements like benches and litter bins and lampposts as well in the future. But that's not everything either. There's two more things that I wanted to do to dress this up a little bit nicer, and one of them is happening over here, which was adding a sidewalk to the side with a balustrade as well. Having paths that actually overhang over the water and that you can actually have some fences next to is pretty much impossible. At least you can't get them functional, but you can get a thing that really looks like it's a sort of promenade next to the water, or a boulevard if you will, and that's why I wanted to try it over here. So I'm just getting a very simple roof in at this point to make the path itself, and a balustrade to make the fence on the side of that. Now each of these pieces is a separate building to make sure that it really follows the curve of the path, which is the one thing that I would say about this. It'll be hard to do this kind of thing without already existing paths as a guideline to know where to go, and I'm definitely really happy that I have these paths on the side, just so that people can at least walk somewhat close to these sidewalks here. But yeah, I just wanted to get this in here to make it look like there is an actual path that really goes over the water and that you can sit on a bench and look at the water from, even if it's not even functional. So that's what we're doing over here. Now the very last thing that I wanted to do here, which I'll get into after I do this bit of rock work and a bit of terraforming, is something that I've been wanting to try in this game for a very long time, but that just has been pretty much impossible just because of the pieces and the fact that there wasn't any recolorability before. But now we do, and I think it's about time to start making some path artwork. And if you're a very long time viewer of me and you still remember some Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 videos, what I used to do way too much in Rollercoaster Tycoon 3 is get all kinds of artwork into the paths, curving colorful shapes or making stars or things, just any kind of thing that looks cool on a path. And I wanted to try something similar to this in Planet Coaster, since we've got the new pieces and we can finally recolor things, and I figured just by sinking these things very slowly and lowly into the paths, you can actually make some cool shapes. So what I'm doing over here is trying to make a compass out of these different castle elements, and it's quite simple to make actually. You just kind of sink them into the ground and make sure you turn snapping off and place them a little bit diagonally, so they have that line in the middle where they both disappear into each other. And they also have that slight diagonal line, so they do sort of go toward the end into a very stretched out triangle shape. And that's what I was going for. And the last thing that I wanted to get into, which is still unfinished, and which might still be a work in progress until I get back to this plaza at some point in the future and start changing some things, is the large ring around the star of the compass, which just turned out to be a very hard job just because it's hard to get a perfect circle in. And it took a lot of trial and error to get that right, and I didn't feature all of it, but you'll see in a minute how it turned out in the end. It just took a lot of time to get the perfect circle in. So skipping forward a little bit, this is what it looks like in the end. We have the compass in the center there. I added a few plants around it just to make it look a bit more fancy, and a few trees on the side here, and that's just about all of the foliage that I'll be adding in the plaza. The next thing that I wanted to do is get custom lights, and I wanted to make these quite fancy as well, not just because, well, the in-game lights are super common and will get pretty tiring to see those all the time. I also think, this is the big entrance parts of the park, and usually in parks you see these really fancy super tall lampposts around the entrance parts. So I wanted to get something like that in here as well. So making a quick post with a bunch of decoration, trying some stuff. I actually think some of those signs will be very good to use as fences at some point in the future, but I'm not going to spoil too much of that. So yeah, it's just a post with a couple of lamps on it, and that's really just about it. And that'll be copied throughout this entrance plaza. I might also use it in the main street of the park, or even like lake that I want to have in the center of the park. But we'll see how useful this piece is going to be. Just wanted to have it to add a bit more life to the plaza and make sure that, you know, it's not a big, dead concrete space. Because the danger with very large paths is that they become like very dead and empty and wide stretches of concrete desert, and that's just about the last thing that I wanted to happen here. And also, I'm adding these quick, cute lamps on the posts on the balustrade. I was figuring for quite a while that I might add some big lamps on the side here, but I just like the looks of these very small lamps on those like balustrade posts way too much, so that's what we're going for. And a couple of finishing touches on the paths as well. I might want to save all of these things as blueprints. That will make well, future parks a bit more easy, and I might even upload them. We'll just see about that. But yeah, just adding a few more planters in here to get more foliage into the plaza, which is always very good. And last but not least, some of the path elements. So there are a few benches over here, and moving some of these topiaries here, because I had like, yeah, I had 6 on one side and 5 on the other side for quite a while there. And I'm not really any OCD kind of person, as you might notice by the fact that this is not a very symmetrical plaza, but that was not very great, so I had to get rid of that. And also wanted to make a very quick planter on the side here, but that didn't really work out, so I ended up just putting the very simple things in there. And the very last thing that I'm doing, really just to finish off the look of this plaza and make it look as if it's, you know, almost in a finished park, to just get an idea of what this entire thing is going to look like with everything around it. Just a bit of finishing foliage. And here I discovered one of my new favorite things in the game, which is like that very low, light brownish bush, which looks a lot like dead grass. And if you sink it into the ground or water, you can really make it look like some swampy grass or reed-like things. If you remember back from Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, there were actually these, the grass pieces that were like supposed to be desert grass or beach grass, but it worked out really well in the water as well. And this sort of gives a similar effect, kind of makes it look a bit more swampy and gets that good transition from the water into the forest on the side here. Anyway, that's it for the time lapse. I'm getting into the real time part now. Right, so let's have some real-time talk for a second. This is what the plaza looks like, and I think this is from right in the middle. It's not perfect, but this is basically the idea of what I wanted to get at as you get into the park. This is basically the site that greets you. I also do like how the curve of the buildings kind of gives you the impression that it's a like kind of slightly curved camera as well, even though that's definitely not the case. At least that's not how the FOV is set up. But yeah, this is what it looks like. This is the entrance, and it is in its more or less finished state at this point. I might get back to it in the future and touch up some stuff, but this is just the idea of what I wanted to do. Also, at some point in the future, when I actually get the castle in the middle of the park, you'll see that like slightly rise up from the back of these buildings, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to have an arch with like an opening in the middle of it, just so you can keep your eyes on the weenie even as you get into the park. So let's get a better look at some of this stuff. I do have to say, I'll get like a real proper look into all of these things when I get into like cinematic parts of videos, which is probably gonna come all the way at the end of this series when I actually finish it and get a cinematic video out there. But this is a bit more of a backstage look. As you can see, I have added these backstage buildings to the things, since this is just one building. Actually, these are just empty husks of facades. Even though they kind of look like real full detailed buildings, they really aren't. Much in a Disney-like way, if you kind of look from the back, it more or less destroys the magic. So this is like one big entrance building actually, which is gonna go into a very small main street over here. At least that is the future planning. It's not going to be a very large main street. It is going to be a bit Disney-esque with having the main street and the big entrance and all that. but it's just going to be a couple of buildings. So we'll already start splitting off the main street just about this point, I think, so that we have enough space to have a like very large walkway over here with a large lake in the middle of the park, which is what I really want to do. So we'll also have some fun like interaction between the lake and the paths in the future, which is always cool. And after that lake, or behind that lake I should say, we'll have the big weenie of the park, which is going to be the castle, which works kind of in a sense like well, a combination almost of the Universal parks and the Disney parks, because the Universal Islands of Adventure of course has that large lake in the middle of it, and I'm pretty sure Hollywood Studios does too. But after that we actually have a more Disney-like, well, big castle, which will be good to have a large castle at the end of the main street, that sort of thing that you really walk toward. But you also get the fun part of having the reflection of the castle in the water and having a cool lake to walk around in the middle of the park. And that'll also more or less be the hub of the park, and then the rest of the pathwork is going to be all of the spokes that go into the different parts. We'll maybe have the African section over here, but it's probably going to end up being over here. I'm not really sure about that yet, since I wanted to do it somewhat geographically accurate, but we're already starting with Europe here, and Europe is going to pretty much cut through the middle of this park, so that would mean that Africa would get squished on the side. We'll probably get America over here, which will probably become South America. I could maybe probably get a bit of North America in there as well, but we'll see how that's going to work out. I don't have any concrete plans for that or anything. And probably the Asian section over here, which is mostly going to be the Japanese, Chinese kind of Asian. But maybe I can go into some fun stuff that I've never tried before, like Indonesian or Indian and things like that. I mean, they are very underrated themes. Same goes for a South American theme. That is something which I've never tried before. And I've also never tried an African theme. So those are definitely themes that I want to try and, well, just see how it goes. Anyway, that's it for today. So thank you guys so much for watching it so far. And I hope to see you guys next time, in which I'll try to make the main street and see how far we'll come with the park planning. Bye bye.